Hello. This is the Great Weapon class for Knight's Rest. I am Bighead, and I was asked to teach this. This is my first time teaching a Great Weapon class, and this is actually my first time uploading a video of a class where there are actual people in attendance instead of us doing it in a vacuum. So we're going to see how this goes. If any of you who are part of the live audience have any questions about anything, feel free to stop me, say, hey, can you clarify that? Can you explain that? Or just, if you have something to interject, feel free. Okay? So, having said that, we're going to kind of jump right in. I am planning on talking about pole arms first, and then I'm going to do great swords later. Having said that, I'm not actually super up to date, I guess you could say, on greatsword fighting. It's something I goof off with. It's something I enjoy. But polearm is going to be kind of where my focus mostly is for the sake of this class. Having said that, one of the first things to do with a polearm is to figure out how you want to grip it, right? So a lot of people will kind of default to what they see in movies and things like that, what you might call like a pikeman stance, right? So in this one, both of my dominant hand is towards the back, both of my thumbs are pointing towards the tip of the weapon. I am not a huge fan of this stance, but I know a lot of people who use it really well. I'm not going to say that it's a bad stance. It's just not comfortable for me, or a bad grip. It's just not comfortable for me. It allows for kind of your maximum range stabs without too much difficulty, and I think that it is going to be more similar to a lot of like how you're throwing sword shots and things like that, without really modifying a ton for the polearm. One of my personal favorite stance or grips. This one is going to I don't know the names of like many of these. I think this is Orman's grip, something to that effect. But I have my dominant hand back with the thumb forward, and my non-dominant hand is going to be forward with the thumb back. So one of the things I like about this is that I have basically the same sort of stabbing mechanics as I do with using the pikeman's grip. So I don't really lose anything there, but I find that I can generate power very easily, going either top down or from the bottom up. So I feel like the slashes for this, my wrist is not at any point, if I start slashing down like this, my wrist here starts to get strained very quickly, but doing this is not a problem. So it allows me to move, it allows me to throw shots, it allows me to defend myself. So this is a grip that's very, very comfortable for me. Another grip, and this one is one that I will use if I'm like tightly packed in a group, if I'm at a large event and I've got people shoulder to shoulder with me, there's a defender in front of me and I'm up against a wall of people on the other side, is I will have this grip. No idea what the name of this one is, but both thumbs are pointed back towards the pommel, and this allows for a lot of over-the-top shots. If there's a large mass of people fighting, a lot of times people are throwing low for legs and things like that, and this allows me to stab over the top. The fact that I'm naturally a relatively tall guy certainly helps set up those shot angles. So I'm not sure if other people are going to get the same mileage out of it, but this is a grip that I like, especially in those sorts of situations where I can't dodge a whole lot. The kind of sweeping motion of the blocks, I can do this, and effectively, if I do it at the right time with the right strength, I can stop basically any shot from hitting me just by going from here to here, from here to here. So I can throw shots, block, throw shots, block. So that's just kind of the general grip stance. The only thing that I haven't covered, and I have no idea why someone would do this, is thumbs that point in opposite directions. I don't know that this would ever be useful at all. But basically, play around with different grips, figure out what works best for you. I've seen people who are like, yeah, I was a hockey player for 10 years, so I really like having my non-dominant hand back and my dominant hand forward because it reminds me of it's comfortable to me to swing a thing in this way. And really that's what you're looking for, is what is comfortable to you. You can build up once it feels natural to you, but you are going to have a hard time forcing yourself into the box of this being a good idea. Like if I don't like this grip. I'm probably never going to like this grip, especially when this is very natural to me and I can do pretty much all of the same stuff with it, or very, very similar things with it. So for pole arms, step one, find a grip that works for you. As far as the rest of it goes, the stance is going to be pretty standard. I tend to keep a wider stance with pole arm than I do with single sword. If I'm fighting single sword, I'm going to be here, right? But if I'm fighting pole arm, I'm usually going to have my non-dominant foot forward. I've got a wide stance, and this allows me to generate power going forward. It allows me to scoot back, and it's going to take me into my next point, which is that overwhelmingly your defense is going to be distance, right? And I feel like that is relatively self-explanatory in a lot of ways, but you don't have a whole lot of ways of staying alive, especially if you're relatively new at it, other than just being far enough away that your opponent can't hit you. And this is talking about, polearm versus like sword and shield, which is going to be a pretty common matchup, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Generally speaking, if you are going to be defending yourself with a polearm, you're going to be defending yourself with distance. You're just far enough away that you can't be hit. Now, if your opponent has a polearm, the other key bit of defense here is that you want to either be batting an attack away with the tip, like if it's a thrust coming at me, I can guide it to the side, or if someone is slashing at me, I want to, generally speaking, catch the block between my hands. It's a very braced spot, but Chelsea, would you be able to grab the polearm over there? And it's a war pole, just so you're aware. But essentially, all we're doing, just basically, you're slashing at me, and all that I'm doing is blocking.
And I'm just trying to.
Yep. So I'm gonna block between the hands. Now, for those of you who have seen like fighting theory videos and stuff like that, we talk about you want to block close to the hand when you're fighting with a sword, because that allows you to block the shot and throw a return without having to regain control of your weapon. Because if you block it on the hand, you never lost control of the weapon, or block close to the hand, it's the least amount of time. Between the hands on a polearm is basically the same concept. Chelsea is not going to, and really almost no fighter that I've ever come across is going to have the power to knock my weapon out of my control by swinging as hard as they can at me if I block between my hands, right? Essentially, they're trying to go through my bench press weight with their foam stick. So it's very, very unlikely to happen. It's just kind of a best practice sort of thing. Whereas if Chelsea swings and I block over here, it's going to, I have to regain control, regain the stance that I want to be in before I can counterattack. So again, just in general, I'm going to want to block between my hands. So now we've covered the real basics on, staying alive and getting a comfortable grip. Most of the rest of polearm fighting is really offensive. If you, because distance is your defense, then that means that a significant portion of staying alive is killing your opponent before they get to you. If you could grab sword and board, I'm going to go through kind of the most common stuff first, because I don't want to teach to tournament fighting. We'll cover that a little bit later. But in general, when someone wants to learn polearm fighting, they want to learn practical stuff, what they're going to use on the ditch field, what they're going to use, most of the time. And most of the time, unless you are training to be a tourney fighter, you're going to be matched up with a polearm against a sword and shield, right? So if I'm fighting someone who has a sword and shield, some of the things to immediately recognize is the fact that this tends to be considered a mismatch. Generally speaking, if the two players are equally skilled and they both have some amount of experience, the shield person has an advantage against the pole person because their objective is just to stay alive long enough to get close. They don't have to do much other than cover themselves with the shield and run forward, right? So knowing that that's what my opponent is going to try to do, the things that I can do to spoil that, especially before I gain the higher precision of a more experienced fighter, is what I'm going to do in general terms is I'm going to be backing up while I'm fighting, right? And making them advance further, because if I stand here and throw shots, Chelsea can just advance into me and I die. So I want to be backing away while this is happening and make their job harder. But what I'm going to be doing a lot of is trying to swing for the sword arm and then immediately come down and hammer one of the legs, right? Because if I can hit my opponent's leg, they can't charge at me. Now this is part of what you might consider like the chess game of LARP fighting. The fact of the matter is that your opponent is going to know that you're wanting to swing for the legs, right? Which is why we have to indicate that we're willing to swing for the shoulder first. So I'm going to go here, I'm going to go here, right? I might go for the shoulder, come around like this, and try to hit the other leg coming through. But I'm wanting to throw, generally speaking, around the shield and hitting either shoulder here or over here or down at the legs. But if you are new, the easiest stuff you're going to be able to connect with is going to be the legs. Now, the obvious downside to this is if you're fighting a reasonably skilled opponent, if I leg Chelsea here and I don't know, you know, and they are on grass and, you know, don't declare posting, then I may have a very difficult time finishing the fight because I've just legged a sword and shield fighter and now took away the only shot that I feel comfortable landing. What I would say is if you're really new with a polearm, try to get that kill, recognize the fact you might not be able to get that kill, be okay with dying to that person. It's Amtgard, you're going to lose some fights. But also be okay with legging a person and then finding a different section of the field to be on. If you can influence fights and then come back and you know, swarm that person, then you're going to be fine. But to gain the experience, try to get the kill first. That being said, if my opponent is legged, are you comfortable kneeling on the concrete, or can we get something? Okay. Okay. So quickly to try to save my demonstration buddy's knees here. If my opponent is legged, what I want to be doing is again more of that circular type of stuff. I'm going to try to come around the shield and swing over here, swing over directly the arm. And generally speaking, I'm going to keep my attacks up high, and if those shots aren't working, what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to come down, get them to raise their shield up, and then stab to the back of me, right? And these are really the kill shots you're looking for, is sniping, you can stand back up now, is sniping an arm over here, or the back leg. If my opponent has a shield, the odds of me getting them to move it enough that I'm hitting torso is relatively low. And if they're legged, everything other than dead leg is a kill anyway. So just do what you can there. So outside of that, a lot of it's going to require, you know, more experience and things of that nature. But if you can, but as you gain more experience, you'll find you throw a lot fewer legs, except for as kind of a last resort, and you're going to be throwing a lot more like top shelf kind of attacks. You're going to swing down, start to pop up and stab down, things like that. And you start to gain a lot of options because you really just have to worry about distance and offense, whereas your opponent has to worry about distance, defense, and offense all at the same time, which is kind of a handy thing to have. So jumping out of one-on-one fighting, one of the things that people are going to have the most fun with, one of the reasons that the polearm is so entertaining to use, is going to be group fighting. Hop back up. So obviously, if Chelsea, Cheaper, and I are fighting, you know, one-on-one, it gets into kind of an obvious dynamic of I'm trying to kill them before they charge me, or before they successfully get to me, and they're trying to defend themselves while charging at me. And we both kind of know how, what the other person is trying to do, and it gets to be relatively straightforward, right? One of the nice things about group fighting is that the opponent who's directly in front of me oftentimes can't just run at me without getting mauled by the person to my right and the person to my left. So this allows me to get a little bit more out there with my shots. It allows me to worry less about defense. So if I'm fighting someone with a shield one-on-one, you're never going to see me sit here and throw a shot like this, where I'm committing all of my body weight into a single shot, because if that shot misses, and one-on-one there's a very good chance that it does, I can't recover from that. I cannot survive what's about to happen next, because I have to get my polearm back to me, and at that point, my opponent is probably to me, and I'm just losing. right? But if I'm fighting a group of people here and I have a group of people supporting me, then it allows me to do things like start to throw over here, turn, stab this person. Chelsea can't charge because if Chelsea starts to charge, I don't have to get to polearm under control. I can step this way and my teammates will kill them. And then they're down 2 people and we can start overrunning them. Right? So really recognize the fact that if you are using a polearm, you're not fighting the person in front of you. You're fighting the person in front of you, the person to their immediate left, the person to their immediate right, and probably the person to that person's left and the person to that person's right. And that you can get shots on all of these people, and that they have to not only worry about the person they're fighting across from, but also worry about the fact that you can kill them from like 3 people down. And even if I don't land a kill shot on someone down here, them needing to defend themselves from my attack might get my ally to land a shot there. So these are just kind of the basics of polearm fighting. And really what you're looking for is the ability to spot opportunities, the ability to spot openings that you are precise enough to land shots into. That's a lot of what we're doing here with polearm fighting. So, you know, with that being said, again, feel free to chop for legs. Arms are generally more useful in group fights, but there's nothing wrong with hitting a leg, especially if your team can now press forward and the opposing, you know, someone on the opposing team can't fall back. That's basically a free kill for your team. And that's what polearms are really, really good for. I guess we're going to go next into pole-on-pole fighting. So I'm going to hand this one to you, so that we can both use the polearm to a degree. So this is just a war pole. I'm going to very briefly cover these towards the end, because most of what I'm saying is going to be pretty universal for polearms, and we'll cover some of the differences right towards the end. So we're both going to have grips that we are comfortable with on our weapons, and the fact of the matter is that most of what I'm going to be doing with polearm fighting, pole against pole, whether this is in a ditch and I happen to be on the flank with someone else who's using the polearm and we're matched up against each other, or it's a tournament, it's a breach weapon category and my opponent is using a polearm the same that I'm using a polearm, what I'm going to be trying to do is, generally speaking, it's lane theory, right? So I'm going to be picking whether I want to throw effectively over the diagonal that the weapon presents or under the diagonal that the weapon represents, right? And this is going to change from person to person, and it can change if I'm fighting like this. The over/under is here versus here, but I can very quickly shift my grip, which means the over/under is here to here. And in general terms, again, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be fighting and looking for those shot opportunities. Because if I throw, if we have a hand match like this, and I start to throw down towards this instead of over or under the diagonal, it's very easy for my opponent just to slide my attack out of the way, right? So if my opponent tries to slash this way at me, it's very easy just for me to brush it aside, and a lot of times I can brush it aside while chambering a shot, and that's kind of the end of the match there. So if your opponent tries to do something like that, you can oftentimes get pretty easy kills, and I suggest not trying to do something like that unless you have a very, very clever plan, because it's generally very easy to survive, and it's very easy to counter and kill. So going back into it, I'm going to be, trying to figure out, do I attack over here, or do I attack over here? Because of the size mismatch, typically what I'm going to be trying to do is presenting an attack up here and then sliding down towards and attacking underneath. There's just more targetable areas underneath and more sunglasses to get hit up above. So these are the sorts of decisions you're going to be making in the moment. It's going to depend on your physiology, your weapon of choice, and your opponent's physiology and their weapon of choice. Unfortunately, there's a lot of little tips and tricks that I can show with polearm fighting. Probably the most consistently useful one if your opponent doesn't have a shield. So this is against Florentine fighters, this is against polearm, things like that. One of the things that I get a lot of mileage out of is starting to throw a stab. Your opponent starts to react to that stab by trying to block it, typically speaking. and then you just pull back and continue to stab in the first place. If your opponent reacts the way that most people do, they will try to sweep to the side, or if they have Florentine and you go to the stab, they'll shove their arm to the side over here to try to knock the tip out of the way so they can charge. And you just pull back and stab, and now their defense is over here. You're gonna get mileage out of that, whatever. Now, the difficulty is a whole lot of the opponents you're going to be fighting in open weapon settings are going to be sword and shield, and the defense for a shield against a stab is this. Right? If you aren't getting a reaction out of your opponent by faking a stab, it's because they're already doing the right thing. Now, if they are Florentine and they don't react, just stab the shit out of them. There's nothing wrong with that. That's their mistake to make. Yeah, so for this being intended to be a kind of beginner class, I think that we've covered polearm reasonably well. We've gone over stance and grip, we've gone over one-on-one fighting, group fighting, a little bit of tournament fighting against kind of the most difficult things. Like, the fact of the matter is that I'm not going to teach a ton of anti-Florentine stuff, because that is a very heavy mismatch. It's very difficult to survive as a flow fighter running up to a polearm. Like, just flat out, if your opponent is winning against you with that, it's because they are very talented at what they're doing. So, that can be covered later, but in general terms, fake hide, swing for the legs, it works just the same as a shield. Your opponent just has a much, much lower margin of error with flow than they do with a shield. So I'm going to, thank you, I'm going to go a little bit into great sword fighting, and then I'm going to double back to, well, I guess I'll start with the warpole before I go into great sword fighting, because the fact of that, can you grab sword board? Thank you. So the fact of the matter is that the theory behind, at least as far as I've gotten with this class, behind speed pole fighting and war pole fighting is going to be pretty similar so far, right? So if I'm fighting with a war pole, I'm going to be doing things like throwing over here, going for legs, a lot of this rotational type stuff. The difference is that my attacks are going to be slower, because this weighs considerably more than that does, and they're also going to crash into your opponent with more authority, right? So whereas with a speed pole, sorry, gnat landed on my tongue, with a speed pole, I might throw a shot like this, and it's going to stop basically as soon as it hits the shield. I might throw it a little bit harder with this, and try to knock the shield down to hit torso or hit arm, right? There's nothing wrong with that so long as you're not hitting face. There is less tolerance in modern Amtgard for missing those sorts of shots and hitting the face. Just be aware of that. But a lot of what I'm going to be doing one-on-one with a war pole is going to be the same sorts of shots, but with a little bit more oomph. And I'm cutting down my opponent's margin of error. They have to block more precisely and stronger against a war pole than they do against a speed pole. For group fighting, one of the things I'm going to do is, with a speed pole, I'm really trying to distract or get wounds or the occasional outright kill while I am difficult to affect by my opponent. With a war pole, I have a couple of other options, which are that I'm not going to necessarily kill my opponent, but I can make them move. I can go and attack. If I'm matched up with a person next to Chelsea, and Chelsea starts advancing on the person next to me, I might stop the advance. I can throw and shove my opponent a little bit, and kind of throw them off of the rhythm by which they live their life. Because of the distance, there's not a ton that they can do about that. So in very, very general terms, for a class geared towards beginners, the war pole is very similar to a speed pole, except that it's slower, and you can turn things into a little bit of a shoving match in a way that doesn't happen in Amtgard super often. So one-on-one, a speed pole is almost certainly going to be better than a war pole, but in a group setting, there's a lot of niceties about being able to push an opponent out of the way, or push their block out of the way, or things like that. You are creating opportunities for your teammates. But once you get isolated one-on-one, you're probably in trouble. So that is what I would say there. I mean, you can try to bash through the shield. Sometimes it'll work. I wouldn't count on it because your opponent's probably just going to be running straight at you and hoping for the best anyway. So we're going to go into Great Sword a little bit. Now, this is not really my forte like I had talked about.
Great sword!
Great Sword!
Great.
And honestly, Aaron probably could teach this section of the class better than I can in a lot of ways. Maybe. But Great Sword is kind of a weird marriage between a polearm and a single short sword, and it kind of has to get used as a weird marriage between a polearm and a single short sword. So in general terms, I have more reach than my opponent, but that reach goes away very, very quickly. Unlike a polearm, your defense is not basically entirely distance control. You will have to get comfortable having your opponent be close enough to attack you, because there's just no, unless you are outrageously good, there is no way of staying out of swing range of your opponent on a consistent basis. So a lot of what I'm going to be doing, though, is in general that kind of circular motion around the shield, the same way that I was talking, but I can throw the shots much faster and cycle them much quicker, much more quickly, so that I can throw a shot and immediately throw into a second shot, immediately throw into a third shot in a way that a polearm just doesn't work. The caveat to all of that is that you have to keep the Great Sword in a place to defend yourself during all of that, whereas with a polearm, you just back up the whole time. So if I'm fighting with a Great Sword, I might come in and start faking here, drop this way, and swing around this way, and I'm going to be maintaining as close as I can this distance that makes it so my opponent will have a hard time hitting me. It's probably possible with that little half step forward I'm going to get killed, but it is harder for my opponent to hit me without being hard for me to hit my opponent. And that's kind of where I'm wanting to stick with a Great Sword. And it's going to be difficult. The Great Sword is not necessarily a min-max weapon, especially if you're a newer fighter.
Yeah.
You're gonna have a difficult time landing shots consistent with a Great Sword without getting killed. Yep. So recognize the fact, again, it is very welcome with any reach weapon. Fake high, swing low, right? It's gonna get you mileage. Not gonna get you kills, but it will allow you to stay alive on the ditch field longer. You can go and do more things. And there's a lot of like creative stuff that can happen with great swords. One of the things that is kind of interesting about pole arms is that they are not as hard to defend against as most people would like to think, because with the grip being where it is, I really only have a relatively limited cone of attack that my opponent has to worry about. There are not a lot of super outside angles that I'm going to land with a pole arm, but with a great sword, some of that starts to go out the window. You know, everyone has stories of a person throwing a spin shot with a pole arm, but what everyone who has any experience knows is that that's entirely superfluous. If you have the opportunity to do it, great, but there's a better, more efficient shot to land. Great swords are when you start to be able to do things like throw outside enough shots that you are outside of that normal cone of attack. Trying to do this with a pole arm is wasted effort. I'm far enough away, my opponent just shifts their shield and they move on with their day, but I can come over like this, throw outside, and throw again, and things like that. So, you know, we're entering the territory where something like a spin shot is not as ridiculous as it would be with a pole arm. Still, probably there's more efficient shots to throw, but you can start with a great sword to get those angles that you would just never throw with a pole arm as your opponent is advancing. Because again, their goal is going to be the same with a great sword or the pole arm, but your threat is different, and you're going to have to capitalize on that to have success with a great sword. So if my opponent is advancing towards me with a pole arm, I just kind of have to throw and back up. But with a great sword, I can throw, step offside and throw, and continue the fight that way. There are a lot of neat things that you can do with a great sword, not a ton of which I would put into a new fighter video. Yeah, I mean, honestly, what I would work on first with a great sword, as far as getting better, is get good at blocking. You know, the idea is that you can block almost every attack at your upper body, either by having your sword out here, or by having your sword out here. Or, if it's coming in the center line, by transitioning from here to here, you can sweep the attack to the side, right? Your legs, you're going to probably defend by being too far away for swinging at the legs to be a particularly good idea. If my opponent wants to extend into a shot at my legs, you know what? Sure. Like I'll hit you in the hip over here. I'll get stabbed in the thigh. That's not the worst thing, but it's also entirely possible for me to back away while doing that, which is going to make it so that I might not get hit in the thigh and they're still getting punished for swinging my legs. So, you know, with and that's kind of the gist of greatsword on shield fighting. Greatsword on in a group fight is going to be very similar to polearm. You're just going to have less reach. But again, you're relying on the fact that my opponent is directly in front of me.
I have oblique.
An oblique, yeah. So I'm going to be relying on the fact that my opponent in front of me is going to have a hard time charging directly at me because I have teammates. So just running directly at me allows me to go like this, and they die. Whereas I can still do things like throw over here, immediately transition, stab over here, and then continue the fight. My opponent's team is now down a player. You just don't have. You are limited generally to your opponent and the person next to your opponent, or the people next to your opponent, as opposed to the people next to them. But a lot of the theory is going to be the same. You're just going to be able to be throwing, you know, you can throw the same sorts of angles and shots as you do in polearm. You just have a few more options on going outside of the accepted, you know, cone of attack, so to speak. As far as tournament fighting is concerned, this is where I start to lose a lot of steam. What was that?
The Lannisters with their regards.
Right. So I start to lose a bit of steam here because I haven't used a greatsword in a tournament at least in some time. And I tend to find that if you are using a greatsword and you're matched up against a speed pole, you're going to have a bad time.
Yes.
It's just very difficult to stay alive with a weapon like this because your defense is passively very low, and you are essentially trying to do the same thing to a pole fighter that a shieldman would be trying to do with a pole fighter. You just have much more limited tools in your toolbox with which to do that. So a lot of what you're going to be doing is the same as you might be doing if you're a flow fighter or, God forbid, a single sword fighter, which is as they attack you, you're pushing down and away, and you're taking that next step, and you're hoping that you survive long enough to take that next step. You're going to do that a couple of times, and if it works, you win, and if it doesn't work, you lose.
It looks like 60% of the time it's bad.
Yeah.
That's on the high end.
Yeah, and again, trying to stick with more beginner level stuff, you know, that's the general idea of how to fight against a polearm if you don't have a shield. If you have a shield, you're generally going to get low, you're going to cover as much of your body with your shield as you can, and you're going to run forward as fast as you can and try to block. Similar idea with anything other than a shield, you just can't cover your body with a shield. You gotta do it actively, no more passive defense. So that's kind of I don't know that I have anything else that I actually wanted specifically to cover. Was there anything you guys had questions about that you wanted to ask about? Anything you wanted to see?
Is there two different fighting styles for war pole versus speed pole, or like is it relatively the same?
So they're going to be similar in a lot of ways, right? Like I talked about, a lot of what you're attempting to do is going to be similar, but you gain a lot more ability. I lost my demonstration buddy, but that's okay. So you're going to be gaining a lot more ability to kind of crush through a block with a war pole. And because of that, there are attacks that I will throw with the war pole that I wouldn't dream of throwing with a speed pole, because it's just going to run into a shield with a speed pole, but you can push through the shield with a war pole. So one of the things to look out for, Alini, can you grab the shield and step on in here? War pole. The question was talking about, are there two different styles for speed pole and war pole? And like, yeah, kinda. So if I have a speed pole, I'm going to generally consider this shoulder to be inviolable unless I do a lot of setup. If I swing over here, that might give me an opportunity to pop a shot over there, something like that. But I'm very rarely going to be swinging at my opponent's shield shoulder with a speed pole, just because it's kind of swinging into what they want. Right? It's a preset block they don't have to worry about. With a warp pole, and I apologize a little bit here, with a warp pole, I might throw that shot. Because I can kind of crush through a block, and my opponent is going to recognize, if they haven't fought a warp pole before, they're going to figure out pretty quickly that can happen. So what you're going to start to get with a warp pole is you're going to get more of, as I swing this way, my opponent is going to start tabling their shield out towards the attack, right? So what this allows me to do is I'm swinging over here, my opponent's putting their shield up there, great, now I'm going to, right, and now I can throw that attack low, or I can start to swing, pull back across, and go for over there. Because with a shield, you're generally speaking not moving to block the speed pole, because you don't have to. But with a warp pole, you're starting to need to move the shield a lot to survive the attack. So it does set up different opportunities. It's going to be hard to describe. It's going to be much more apparent when you use a warp pole, if you use a warp pole. That you just have different opportunities, but they're also harder to capitalize on. Like if I am fighting my opponent with a speed pole, and I go to throw for that shoulder, and they table their shield up to avoid getting crushed through the block like they do with the warp pole, that's easy, right? Like that person's going to be dead momentarily. Because every sort of thing that I talked about, I can do easier with a speed pole to capitalize on that than I can with a warp pole, right? But so I guess it would be easiest of saying that it's a warp pole will create the most opportunities, whereas a speed pole capitalizes the best off of the opportunities they're creating, right? Which is why if you're in a tournament, a speed pole versus warp pole setting, the opportunities are almost identical, and the speed pole is better at capitalizing off of the opportunities. So speed pole will just inherently have advantages. Yes, you can lose with a speed pole to a warp pole, but the advantage is still there. So, as far as it goes, yeah, there's a different style. You're going to probably have to have it in your hands for the most part, or have a more experienced teacher than I am on how to capitalize off of that. Because I've seen people talk about, like, if your opponent has their sword off to the side, you can effectively bash down at their wrist, and if they cock their sword to the side to survive that, go ahead and put it off to the side, like this, basically. Yeah. So this is how they might survive that. Well, now that I've bashed through and they're resetting, it's entirely allowable, go ahead and start resetting, to come from underneath and do the same thing. And if I'm part of a line fight, my opponent's not charging at me, I can almost repeat that motion until they get armed and die. Right? That's never going to happen with a speed pole. Right? Because blocking a speed pole is a very similar experience to blocking a sword. Most people are really rather good at it by the time they're stepping on the ditch wheel. So are there differences? Yes. But so much of it is going to come down to this creates opportunities, this capitalizes off of opportunities. So, and it's going to be a little weird, but if you gain some experience with it, that's going to be pretty
Question for Warlord Bighead.
Well,
Which would you prefer to use?
So in anything except for the most tightly packed, overrun battlefields, I'm going to be using a speed pole. Even then, I like having speed poles in those situations because if you have fast, precise shots, you can rack up quite the body count with a speed pole. But it's also nice.
I've never seen this.
But it's also nice being able to go. And again, this is less accepted in Amtgard culturally than it used to be. So this is a big part of why I don't use warp poles as much, is if I am part of a shield wall here, and Alini is part of a shield wall there, I have very few problems, historically speaking, with going up to my opponent's hardened shield that I can't crushing break my way on through. And let's say for a moment that Alini is armored up and not wanting to get hit, a lot of times you'll see a shield wall just go to their knees in front of the enemy, because they're functionally impossible to move within the game rules in that situation. You cannot kill them. You can't make them level change by legging them. Your options are very limited. But physics triumphs over game rules every time. And if I am a really rather large individual and I have the ability to put a lot of body weight and leverage into a shot, my opponent's shield can be as hardened as it wants to be, but if I cock back and stab as hard as I can, I have created shields or holes in shield walls without affecting, per game rules, the person that I'm fighting against. In those sorts of situations, warp holes can be invaluable. One or two skilled warp holes just shoving people aside is going to push a hole through a shield wall really rather quickly. It can be really nice in those situations. Amtgard culturally doesn't appreciate as much seeing people get knocked sprawling during fights, so I have to be a bit more careful with that than I used to be. So that would be kind of the best answer to Battlemaster Sir Aenius's question about which do I prefer, is in almost all circumstances, I prefer using a speed pole. Every once in a while, it's really nice having a war pole fighter on your side. Because someone getting shoved out of position, now all of a sudden you as a speed pole fighter, again, they have created the opportunity, you capitalize on the opportunity. And you can absolutely devastate groups of people while they're trying to react to a war pole by just killing them before they recover from anything that's going on in the training. Anyone else have any questions, comments, clarifications that they would like? No? Okay. Then, Itma, go ahead and hit the